Hello everyone, this is TubeMix or Will here, either will do. And yesterday, we received the news that I definitely wasn't expecting. I don't think anyone was really expecting. Or if they were, not the timing they'd have expected it to, if that makes sense. Because the day, let's see, what day are we on today? Sorry, it's Wednesday, and yes, Monday, sorry. Monday, we had the announcement that the Piano Room would be back on BBC Radio 2 on Ken Bruce's show, when an artist, they do two of their own songs and a cover with the BBC Concert Orchestra at Maida Vale Studios and in front of a piano, as you can guess by the title. And yesterday, on Tuesday, we received the news that Ken Bruce would be leaving BBC Radio 2 after his mid-morning show after 31 years and 45 years working for BBC Radio, which I could sense. I'm not surprised that Ken has decided to step down from the mid-morning show. What I am surprised is that he's leaving the BBC, and also I'm very surprised about the timing of it, especially with the Piano Room announcement on Monday, as I said, and then this the following day. I mean, really big news. So the interesting thing is who will take over. Lots of names being floated around. Jo Wiley, she presented mid-mornings on Radio 1. I've never listened to Radio 1 because it's not my station at all. And Gary Davis, who's stepped in for Ken. Well, so is Jo, actually. Claudia Winkleman, who again has stepped for Ken, but I can't see it being her. I can't see it being Ryland. So it's going to be very interesting, isn't it, who they're going to pick? Or is it going to be OJ? One of the things the BBC wants to do is to have one daytime show coming from outside London. So that could maybe fill the requirement of that. And maybe OJ would be, a good person, having covered for Sarah Cox and Steve and the interim period between Simon Mayo and Sarah Cox on Drive Time, because him and Angela Scanlon looked after that slot. So it's going to be very interesting, isn't it? Will it be OJ? Yes, and I can't believe it. I always thought when Ken stepped down from the mid-morning show, he'd be like the late great Sir Terry Wogan, in that he'd moved to Sunday mornings or do specials, but always remain with the BBC, even if it's not with a regular Radio 2 show. I still thought he'd be with the BBC, but to be leaving to go to commercial radio, I'm not sure I could have seen that coming. I mean, Simon Mayo, yes, but Ken has always been really a BBC man, really. So I have to say this is very surprising, and he's going to be taking Popmaster with him. So if you want us to Popmaster, you're going to have to retune to Grace Hits Radio. I won't be, because I don't like adverts and commercial radio, commercial TV. I mean, well, generally I'm a BBC person for television, but don't actually mind commercials on the TV. But on the radio, I really don't want adverts, really. So yeah, could it be Trevor Nelson? He's been another name floating round. He sat in for Ken as well a couple of times. And yeah, Trevor's quite good. I used to listen to him. His Rhythm Nation now, his Rhythm Nation show is now on Monday to Thursday, from 10 till midnight. But he used to be on 8 till 10 on a Saturday, and I used to listen to that show, but ever since he moved to weekdays, really, well, I've just not fancied it. But would I listen to Trevor in Ken's slot? I don't think so. I think also the biggest thing I've always loved is Popmaster. You know, I'm into my music, I'm into, you know, quizzes and stuff. So Popmaster is one of the best things, I think. And I've always listened to, even if Ken's been away, and Popmaster's always been done with the stand-in host, because whenever people have stood in for Ken, they have been doing his show. You know, there's been Popmaster, there's been the Love Song, there's been Tracks of My Years. I wonder if that's going to be going to Greatest Hits Radio. We've not heard anything about that, have we? I would guess not, but who knows? I always thought also that Ken, you know, what they could have done is kept Ken on the BBC but spun Popmaster into I don't know, its own separate little show. Or Tracks of My Years, I think you could certainly put that into a separate little show and stick it on BBC Sounds. Oh, and if you can hear something, it's just beginning to chuck it down with hail. So yeah, if you can hear that, that's what the noise is. Yeah, what's your reaction? I'd love to see what you think in the comments below. You know, will you be retuning with Ken to retuning to Ken on Greatest Hits Radio? Will you be continuing listening to Radio 2? Sorry. Or neither, you're just not going to bother at all. It'd be interesting to hear your views. And do you think Radio 2 are really going to struggle with this? I mean, when Terry Wogan left Breakfast the first time round, they really did struggle. Funnily enough, Ken was actually chosen to replace him, but he struggled. And then they brought in Derek Jameson. You might remember him. Always had very bizarre, very in his gruff voice, morning, Jameson here, which is not really what I certainly wouldn't want that first thing in the morning. It sounded like an army general. So yeah, and then there was Brian Hayes. I've not heard any of him, but he came from a news background. He was on LBC, I think, and was on 5 Live as well. So no, definitely wouldn't have been keen on him either. And then it wasn't until Terry returned in 1993 that finally they, they didn't struggle. And actually, to be fair, even if you're not into Chris Evans, I think Chris Evans still did very well with Breakfast. To me, I think he was always going to replace Terry. Because when he was brought in initially for some Saturday afternoon shows in 2005, and I never heard those. And Leslie Douglas, the boss of Radio 2 then, said to, well, if you behave yourself, then whenever Terry decides to hang up his headphones, then you can have breakfast. And so, even though she left because of the sax skates, the Andrew Sachs incident, I'm sure you remember Jonathan Ross and Russell Brand, Terry hung up his headphones at the end of 2009, and Chris took over from 2010, and he did get breakfast. And I always preferred Terry in his style. I liked Chris on Drive Time, but never really. Although I still kept listening to it. 1, because it was Radio 2. 2, because Ken was on after him. And 3, well, the music then was still pretty good. There was a lot of stuff that I liked. Chris is quite good at doing Chris is good at doing interviews. There's lots of great features that they had, which is the top tenuous, sorry, tenuous. That's not even a word. There was the Golden Oldie, and they got Moira Stewart, who had not long since been axed from the BBC, got rid of her as a newsreader, and Chris Evans decided to bring her in to Radio 2. And and Zoe Ball. I used to enjoy Zoe sitting in for Ken, and I enjoyed her Saturday morning breakfast show, and I enjoyed her Saturday afternoon show, but I don't really enjoy her breakfast show really, and I'm only listening to it at the moment because Nikki Chapman's doing early breakfast. I need to catch that up actually, and obviously Phil Williams is now doing one of OJ's shows on a Monday. Although, if OJ takes over Ken's slot, well, that will probably be Phil Williams full time, which would be excellent. I think Phil is such a great broadcaster. He can do light stuff, but he can also do serious stuff, which is why he was so good on 5 Live, because any time a major story broke, Phil is a very calming voice, not confrontational, but just a very, very calming voice. Certainly unlike Stephen Nolan, who I'm not a fan of at all. And well, I've gone off listening to 5 Live anyway. But yeah, or maybe Phil Williams will eventually take over the slot that Jeremy Vine does. I mean, it's going to be interesting. 21 years next year, and if Jeremy's contract, maybe they'll decide for a change. To be honest, I do think it's time for Jeremy to go, because I think he's too much of a parody of himself, and I think you need someone who's not. Now, Jimmy Young was to a point, but never sounded a parody of himself. And I've heard a few old clips of him, and he's actually someone who could really hold people to account and do that very well. And I think Phil would be absolutely perfect. Now, would I listen to Phil if it was, that same news mix of current affairs and music? I don't know. Maybe I likely would. But then, yeah, I don't know. That'd be an interesting one, wouldn't it? But yeah, which presenter do you also think might be on their way out at Radio 2? Do you think Steve Wright will? I mean, to be honest, the thing about the Ken news is I thought, and we all thought, loads of people have been thinking Steve Wright. They would have never guessed Ken would have left. They think that Steve would go. And he still could go, of course, because, I mean, he's been away from Love Songs a couple of weeks. Of course, he could have just been ill, or we could have been having discussions, or yeah. Well, we'll have to wait and see. But it's going to be very interesting, isn't it? And yeah, I don't know how long I'll keep listening to Radio 2 for. Well, I'll still keep listening to it on a weekday, because Jo Wiley is excellent in the evening, and I really hope she doesn't get Kem's show. Not because she isn't great, and she is great, she is fantastic, but that show suits her to a T, and she doesn't have to play a lot of stuff on the playlist. It's a lot more freer. It's just a lovely show for an evening. So I really hope that Jo doesn't get that slot. I'd love Gary Davis to get it, because, it'd be nice for Gary to not be a specialist DJ, because yes, of course he was around in the 80s, but Gary does love his new music as well, and I think he's really popular with management. The fact that he's covering in for Zoe Ball now, one of the covers along with Vernon Kay, seems to me to think that management really do rate him, and a lot of listeners rate him as well. I think he's fantastic. I remember, I'm not keen on Sarah Cox, but I do have her partially to thank, along with Simon Mayo, because if you remember, in March 2017, Sarah Cox did a 24-hour dance-a-thon for comic relief, and Simon Mayo decided to ring up Gary Davis because they used to be on Radio 1, and Gary had been away from radio. He'd done bits and pieces, but if you listened to him when he stood in for Steve, he said that he threw out all his old jingles and got rid of a lot of stuff. But yeah, Simon said, well, do you want to come on, give Sarah support, and people, will want to know what you've been doing all these years for all this time. And it got such a lovely response, and clearly the management knew the response of Gary was great. And so he got asked to cover Sarah Cox on Sounds of the 80s, and then got asked to cover Steve Wright, and then Ken Bruce, and then got Sounds of the 80s, which to me is just... I did listen to the show with Sarah, but as I said, I was never a fan of Sarah, and I was so excited because I love watching old Top of the Popses, and so I knew who Gary was, and I like researching about old radio and stuff, and I'd heard clips of him and its jingle, and so I was very excited that he was getting a regular slot, and I still think he's fantastic, still brilliant with Sounds of the 80s, and he seems to have covered almost every other slot. It's amazing. The guy just never seems to stop. But I'm sure he'll be receiving a good break, because scheduled on the 28th of January, it's scheduled to be Edith Bowman sitting in for him on Sounds of the 80s. So that's going to be great. Although, to be honest, I do like Edith, but I probably prefer Kim Wilde or Carol Decker to maybe sit in for Gary. Those would be my two choices. But yeah, Edith's fine. So what do you think? Again, I'd like to see your thoughts in the comments, and it'd be great to hear from you. Oh, and one more thing. So, TubeMix's Highlights of the Year is going to be re-uploaded, and a good mate of mine and friend of the channel, Chloe Hickson, has recorded a New Year's message, and Sam Tiller, another mate and great friend of the channel, is also recording a New Year's message. So I'm going to be re-uploading it with their messages, and I'm going to also redo the outro. I'm going to don on my Christmas jumper briefly again. I mean, well, it feels a bit Christmassy, doesn't it, with the snow right now in some parts of the country. So so I'm going to be doing that again, because I wasn't happy with how the outro. And I also do apologise for yesterday's live stream. It was a bit of a car crash, wasn't it? So I thought I'd come here daytime. I was round with energy, and I thought I'd come and do it again, and I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, I'm definitely going to be listening to Ken's last show, and it's going to be emotional. It is going to be emotional. I kind of wish that, my last word on this, I kind of wish that Ken would have stayed until after May, because we've got the coronation, and Ken's a great commentator, very experienced commentating for that. But also, I'm thinking that bank holiday, we could have had another all-day Popmaster. Now, whether they'll continue that on Greatest Hits Radio, I don't know. But we'll see. Because, and that would have been a perfect... Oh, and Eurovision, of course. That's also in May. So, therefore, Ken could have had his grand finale, Eurovision in the UK, all-day Popmaster, and the coronation, and... you would have had an absolutely fantastic finale to Ken's career at the BBC. But obviously his contract expires at the end of March, or maybe Greatest Hits will radio will allow him to commentate for the coronation, because obviously it's a once in a lifetime, isn't it, event? And Ken, you know, is not a young man, so how, you know, it's probably not, you know, I don't want to curse it, but he's probably not going to see another coronation. So we'll see, right? But yeah, we'll see. Right, thank you for watching. If you want to, like, share, comment and subscribe to the TubeMix YouTube channel. And I'll see you this Saturday, for TubeMix's Did You Know That? And 3 more facts. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. And TubeMix's Highlights of the Year, a re-upload as well. So, thank you for watching, and goodbye.